I'm Brian Apostamato, and I will be discussing my activism project. For my activism project, I was inspired by two unsettling accounts, one in fact I'm a witness of. Vaughn Hamilton is my good friend, who happens to be an African American male and has experienced two offensive and demeaning acts of racism towards him during the current 2011 spring semester. Officers of the Charleston Police Department perpetrated these acts of racism in which he experienced. When I was discussing this activism project with him, he was very adamant about me following through with this topic. His persistent nature truly inspired me to take this topic farther than simply leaving them as events that occurred in the past. The first act occurred on King Street while we were in a group of our friends walking back to our home. Vaughn was approached by two Charleston police officers that insisted to see his identification due to the rationale of suspicion of public intoxication. Vaughn is 20 years old and ultimately was arrested for underage intoxication. As a witness of this account occur, I can adamantly say that he was not acting any differently than any of our other friends, including myself. The officers did not use any sobriety tests to further identify that Vaughn was intoxicated and instead handcuffed and issued him into the backseat of the cop car. This was very unsettling to watch, especially since they did not act upon any means of appropriate measures in the situation. Vaughn was the only African American in our group, and the two white officers did not approach anyone else at the scene. It truly seemed as if they were only focused on arresting Vaughn. Vaughn spent the entire night in prison until he was released at 9 a.m. the following morning. He was issued with a public intoxication ticket. Due to the officer's inadequate sobriety test and unprofessional manner, the court dropped the charges issued against Vaughn. The second account was on Saturday, March 26, 2011. Vaughn was on his way back to our home when two males approached him, instigating a fight. The argument began to take a turn for the worse when the two unknown males started talking badly about his girlfriend, who happened to be with Vaughn at the time this occurred. In defense of her, Vaughn exchanged fighting words, thinking the situation would not exceed anything more than a verbal confrontation. The situation became heated almost immediately, and Vaughn was punched by one of the other males. In an attempt to get away from the fight, Vaughn proceeded to push the attacker to the ground. A police officer was close by to the scene and confronted the situation. The two males immediately placed the blame on Vaughn as the instigator of the fight, whereas on the other hand, Vaughn was persistently trying to explain that he was innocent in the situation. The officer that approached the argument happened to be the same officer whom arrested Vaughn a month earlier. The officer proceeded to tell Vaughn that he was fortunate to not be getting arrested and that he felt as if the other kids, whom in fact were the initial attackers, should be pressing charges against him. Initially, without previous knowledge and background of this unmerited behavior demonstrated by the Charleston Police Force, I would not have thought of this as an act of racism. Due to the extenuating circumstances, this specific officer arresting Vaughn previously under false claims and as well defending the two white attackers opposed to Vaughn and his girlfriend is very disturbing and alarming. The issue I am addressing for my activism project is both general and specific. The general aspect involves any acts of racism perpetrated upon students in the surrounding Charleston area, whereas the specific issue relates to Vaughn and so many others who believe they have been victims of unwarranted actions by members of authority within this community. I've addressed this issue in a way where I can access these specific concerns involving race that many students feel internally, but do not always have the ability to express verbally. I went to Liberty Dining Hall located on the corner of Liberty Street and St. Philip Street on 3 different occasions. I set up a table by the entrance due to the high levels of traffic near that area. I talked to many students who approached me due to their curiosity towards my activism project. I also created a survey that was readily available to anyone who was willing to take a few minutes to help me out with my research. The survey included 10 questions identifying the main issues of racism that students feel are visible within our community. I received 74 completed surveys by the end of my third night at Liberty Dining Hall. I was not expecting the discussion table to promote as many inquiries as it did. The results are as follows: 31 males and 43 females, 36 Caucasian, 25 African American, 7 Hispanic, 3 Asian, and 3 other. 51 of 74 students answers the racism was prevalent in the surrounding Charleston area. 34 said that they witnessed an act of racism outside of campus, and 23 said they witnessed a racism act occur on campus. 19 students have experienced acts of racism on campus, and 29 have experienced racism off of campus. 39 students had heard stories of the Charleston Police Department displaying acts of discrimination due to one's race, whereas 20 students answered that they had witnessed members of higher authority perpetrating these racism acts. 26 students have experienced or know of people who have been subject to these acts. The discussion table I set up and the survey allowed for an array of students to voice their opinions about prejudice and racism being prevalent in a society where we are all promised equality. I address this activism project in this specific manner because by allowing the ability to talk about these flaws within our system aids in distinguishing the issue. Ultimately, raising awareness to the surrounding community and those who are not as well informed. Many choose to be silent about racism due to feelings of discomfort about acting against societal norms and standards. Due to the results of the survey, it illustrates how many individuals have concerns and apprehensions that are so commonly kept silent. This activism project relates to the content of African American Studies because we have learned throughout the semester about the persistent struggle for equality. Even after slavery was abolished in 1833, blacks were oppressed in society for over 100 years until Brown versus Board in 1954. Even today, racism still is prevalent in the United States, and many choose to remain silent about this ongoing issue. Educational inequalities produce economic ones. It is an endless cycle since most school systems are allocated money reliant upon the community's tax base. What we learn as children is reliant upon our surroundings. People who come up by their bootstraps, this idea inspired by Booker T. Washington, usually occurs due to what has been modeled to them throughout adolescence. As long as educational and economic inequalities continue to be perpetrated for certain segments of society, then racism will continue to exist. How this idea relates to this prejudice seen by students in Charleston is the preconceived notion that many look at African Americans as troubled individuals. Due to the color of one's skin, many people continue to make assumptions about who they are as an individual. Vaughn's situational circumstances are a perfect representation of how this prejudice still exists within our community. If our community is unable to recognize that there are still acts of discrimination occurring based upon one's race, then this unjust bias will continue to exist for infinite amounts of time. On an ending note, I want to leave the class with this influential idea. Education and awareness are the only means that will aid in the elimination of racism. If we spread our knowledge of racism being prevalent in society, change will come.